I told myself it was just a friendly massage. That's how it started, his hands on my shoulders, a casual joke, a little too long of a pause. But the second he touched me there, I knew I should have stopped it. I didn't, I couldn't. I used to pride myself on self-control, on being the kind of woman who could smile politely and walk away from temptation. But when you've been starving emotionally for years, it doesn't take much to feel full. My husband, Mark, isn't a bad man. He's loyal, hard-working, provides everything I could ever need on paper. But that's just it. It's always on paper. In real life, he's emotionally absent. Quiet dinners, eye contact that lasts 2 seconds too long with his phone instead of me, and intimacy that feels more like a chore than a connection. I hadn't felt truly wanted in years. Then came Damon. He was Mark's co-worker, younger, charming, full of playful sarcasm and that kind of magnetic energy you pretend to ignore but secretly crave. He came by one weekend to help Mark with something in the garage. I was in leggings and an oversized tee, no makeup. Hair a mess, the version of me even I don't like looking at. But Damon looked anyway and smiled. It wasn't creepy, not overtly flirty, just warm. Like he saw me, like I mattered, and that stupid little spark. It felt like oxygen to someone who's been holding their breath for years. The second time Damon came over, I noticed the way he leaned when he talked to me, just slightly too close. Not enough to be inappropriate, but enough to feel deliberate. Mark was in the backyard, fixing something with the lawnmower. Damon stepped inside to grab a drink, and we ended up talking in the kitchen. Nothing heavy. Music, travel, random stories. Then he asked if I'd ever been to New Orleans. I told him no, that Mark and I don't travel much anymore. He tilted his head and said, "That's a shame. You seem like someone who should be out in the world, not locked inside these walls." That line stayed with me, not because it was brilliant, but because it was the first time in years someone saw me as a woman, not just someone's wife. I felt guilty for how much I replayed that line in my head over the next few days. The third time he came by, Mark had to leave suddenly, some emergency with his cousin. Damon offered to finish the garage shelves they were working on. I almost said no, but I didn't. Instead, I made coffee. And when I brought it out to him, he wiped his hands on his jeans, took the mug, and smiled like we were sharing something intimate. It was just coffee, but the silence that followed wasn't. Later that afternoon, I bent down to pick something up from the floor in the living room. Damon was nearby, and I felt it, his eyes on me. I straightened up, turned around slowly. Our eyes locked, and he didn't look away. That was the first moment I knew. If I gave him the smallest opening, he'd take it. And even worse, I wasn't sure I wanted to stop him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his voice, remembering the way his gaze didn't flinch. It wasn't just attraction, it was permission. And that scared the hell out of me. The next time I saw him, it was completely unplanned. Mark had invited a few coworkers over for a small weekend get-together. Beer, burgers, music on low. People laughing around our backyard fire pit. Damon arrived late. I had tried to look casual, effortless, but when I caught my reflection, I realized I had tried too hard. Lipstick I hadn't worn in months, jeans that hugged my hips a little tighter than I'd admit. Damon noticed. When our eyes met across the fire pit, it was electric. A quiet jolt that made me instantly look away. Later that evening, I was inside alone cleaning up. The others were outside talking politics or football, I don't even know. I was rinsing dishes when I heard the door creak open behind me. It was him. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, leaning against the doorway. "Need help?" he asked softly, stepping in. I nodded, maybe too quickly. He came close, grabbed a dish towel, and stood shoulder to shoulder with me. For a few minutes it was innocent, quiet, tense in the worst kind of way. Then I dropped a glass. It didn't break, but it rolled off the counter. I bent to grab it, and that's when it happened. His hand brushed against my lower back, barely a touch, a whisper really, but it lingered. I froze, not because I was shocked, but because I didn't move away. I stood there, my breath caught, heart pounding, and when I finally straightened up, I looked at him, eyes searching, heart begging for logic to kick in, but logic was nowhere. There was only heat, there was only him. After that moment in the kitchen, things changed quietly but definitively. We didn't talk about what happened. There were no texts, no whispered secrets, but the next time Damon came over, we both knew the boundaries were thinner, more fragile. Mark had asked him to help with moving some furniture up from the basement. I stayed out of the way, or at least I tried to. But when Damon came up, shirt clinging to his chest from the heat, something in me twisted. He walked past me, gently brushing my arm. That's all it took, just skin on skin, a simple graze, and my knees almost buckled. Later, I was folding laundry in the guest room. The door was half open. Damon came by, leaned against the frame. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was low, calm, but heavy, like he knew I hadn't been. I nodded, avoided his eyes. I haven't felt like myself lately," I said. It was the first truth I'd allowed to escape my lips in a long time. He stepped closer, not too close, but close enough that I felt his presence like a heat wave. "You ever think maybe you've been holding back too much for too long?" he asked. I turned to him, finally looked at him. "I'm married," I said quietly. He didn't flinch. "I know. I'm not asking for anything." Then his voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper. "But I see you." 3 words. That's all it took to unravel months of resentment, of silence, of pretending I was okay. I didn't touch him, he didn't touch me, but that moment, that was the first time I felt like I'd already crossed the line, because something deep inside me whispered, "You don't want to say no." For days after that conversation, I felt like I was living in 2 versions of myself. In one world, I was the wife, the dependable, predictable woman who made dinners, paid bills, folded laundry like clockwork. In the other, I was seen, desired, not invisible. I hated how much I craved the second version. Mark never noticed. That made it worse. He was always tired, always distracted, and when he did notice something was off, he chalked it up to hormones or stress. I tried to avoid Damon, I really did. I'd make excuses, disappear into rooms, keep conversations short. But one afternoon, the dam finally broke. Mark had gone out to pick up supplies for a project they were working on in the garage. Damon stayed behind. He asked if he could use the downstairs bathroom. I was upstairs when I heard the door open, then footsteps, then silence. He didn't call out, didn't make an excuse. He just appeared at the top of the stairs. My breath caught in my throat. I should have told him to leave. I should have reminded him this wasn't okay, but instead, I just stood there, frozen. He walked toward me slowly, not touching, not speaking, just watching, like he was waiting for me to be the one to say stop. But I didn't. He brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear. That tiny gesture, so gentle, so intimate, felt more dangerous than a kiss. "Tell me to go," he said. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He leaned in, and for a second I swore I would step back, but my feet didn't move, my body didn't resist, my lips parted not to speak, but to receive, and when his mouth finally met mine, I kissed him back. It was soft at first. His lips pressed against mine like a question, not a demand, and when I didn't pull away, he deepened it. Slowly, carefully, it didn't feel reckless. It felt earned, like we had built this tension brick by brick, week by week, until this moment was the only natural outcome. My heart was pounding, my hands trembled, but still I didn't stop it. In the space between his breath and mine, All the guilt was drowned out by something louder. Need. We pulled apart when we heard the rumble of Mark's truck pulling into the driveway. I stepped back, my fingers touching my lips like I didn't recognize myself anymore. Damon whispered, "I'm sorry," but his eyes weren't sorry. They were lit with something fierce, like this moment had only confirmed what he already knew. I was reachable. I was already his in some unspoken way. I turned and walked away without a word, closed the bathroom door behind me, and stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stared at the version of myself I had always feared becoming. I hadn't just betrayed my husband. I had betrayed my own sense of who I thought I was. Mark came in calling my name. I splashed cold water on my face and came out smiling like nothing had happened. He didn't notice the crack, but I felt it like a fault line waiting to split me in two. After that kiss, things didn't explode, they just simmered. I kept going through the motions: breakfast, work, folding laundry, fake smiles. But underneath it all, I felt like I was living inside a lit matchbox. Every time Damon came over, my body would tense before I even saw him. And every time he left, a small part of me whispered, "You wanted him to stay." Mark still didn't notice. One night, the three of us sat in the living room watching a movie. Damon took the recliner. Mark stretched across the couch. I sat at the far end. At one point, Damon's eyes caught mine. It wasn't overt. Just a second too long, just a shade too deep. I looked away, heart pounding, wondering if Mark saw it. He didn't. He was already half asleep. I was alone, in a room with two men. One I had vowed my life to. The other I had already broken that vow for. Later that night, I stood outside on the porch alone, needing air. Damon came out behind me. Neither of us spoke, not at first. Then he said, "You're not sleeping, are you?" I shook my head. Nope. We stood there like that, two liars pretending not to know what was coming next. I think about it all the time. He finally said, "That kiss." I didn't respond, didn't need to, because the silence between us said everything. When he stepped closer, brushing his fingers against my hand, I didn't pull away. I should have, but I didn't, because I had already given him 100 yesies without ever saying the word. It happened 2 days later. Mark had gone out of town for a weekend construction seminar. It was rare he barely traveled, and he left me with his usual absent-minded kiss and a joking, "Don't burn the house down." I laughed, waved, and watched him drive off. I should have felt relief or freedom, but all I felt was nervous, because I already knew what was going to happen, and worse, I wasn't going to stop it. I didn't invite Damon over. I didn't have to. He texted an hour later, "You alone?" I stared at the screen for a while, typing, deleting, typing again. Then finally I sent, "Yeah." He didn't ask for permission after that. He showed up just after dark. When I opened the door, we didn't talk. We didn't explain. We didn't pretend this was accidental. He stepped inside and kissed me like he'd been starving for it, like I was something he had waited too long to taste again. And this time, I didn't stop it, didn't hesitate, didn't hold back. It wasn't rough, it wasn't dramatic, it was slow, deliberate. Every touch was a question, and every time my body answered yes. Clothes came off like they had no meaning. And when it finally happened, when he touched me there, and I didn't say no, I realized something gutting. I wanted this, not out of revenge, not out of boredom, but because I had crossed so many lines in my heart. The physical act wasn't betrayal anymore, it was just confirmation. Afterward, we lay there in silence, not out of guilt, but because we both knew this was no longer a game. Something real had been born in the middle of something very wrong, and neither of us could undo it. The next morning, the guilt came in waves, but it wasn't loud, it was quiet, heavy, like a wet coat I couldn't take off. Damon was still asleep in my bed, Mark's bed. I stood in the doorway, staring at this man who wasn't my husband, lying where my husband should have been. And I hated myself, not just for what I'd done, but because part of me didn't regret it. I'd felt seen. I'd felt wanted in a way I hadn't felt in years. Mark had always been reliable, safe, a good man. But somewhere along the line, we stopped talking. We became partners in bills, in errands, in schedules. Not in passion, not in truth. And Damon looked at me like I was alive. When he finally woke up, he smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world to be in my sheets. He made coffee. He kissed my shoulder like we were already a couple, like we'd always been. I didn't have the courage to tell him to stop. That afternoon, I scrubbed the sheets 3 times. Not because I wanted to erase what happened, but because I needed to feel like I still had some control over this fire I had started. When Mark returned home that evening, I smiled too big, hugged too long, overcompensated like a child who had broken a toy and taped it back together before their parent found out. He kissed my forehead and said, "You miss me or something." I laughed, but deep down I knew. I was no longer his in the way that mattered, because I had touched a version of myself I didn't know existed, and worse, I liked her. She was bolder, wilder, freer. She scared me, but she thrilled me too. From that point on, it wasn't just a mistake anymore. It became routine. Mark would leave for work, and a few hours later, Damon would knock at the back door like a ghost I'd invited in. We never talked about what we were doing. We never defined it, but we also never stopped. Some days it was quick, urgent, messy. Other days, slow and quiet, like we were borrowing time that didn't belong to us. I started making excuses to Mark more often. Late grocery runs, yoga classes I didn't attend, helping a friend move even though no one was moving. Lying became easy, too easy. But the worst part wasn't the deception, it was that I started enjoying the thrill. Every lie I told was like a little rush of power. I had always been the dependable wife, the one who cleaned, cooked, smiled at family dinners, the one who said I'm fine, even when I wasn't. Now I had a secret. And in that secret, I felt invisible and invincible all at once. But Damon wasn't content with just sneaking around. He started wanting more. He'd leave little notes in my purse, call me late at night, whispering, "Do you think about me when you're lying next to him?" And I did. God help me, I did. But the guilt, it never really left. It just sat in the background like static noise. Sometimes I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and stare at Mark's back as he slept, his breathing steady, his hand occasionally reaching for mine in his sleep, and I'd think, if he ever finds out, it'll destroy him. But then Damon would text or show up with that look, the one that made me forget how to breathe, and all that guilt would get swallowed up by something stronger, desire. I don't know when exactly it changed. At first, it was simple physical, stolen, a shared hunger between two people who should have known better, but somewhere along the way, feelings began to grow. Damon started staying longer. He brought groceries, helped with small repairs, even left his toothbrush once. That moment, seeing his toothbrush next to Mark's, hit me like a truck. I remember staring at the sink, brushing my teeth between the two men whose lives I was splitting, and wondering, what the hell am I doing? I was playing house with both of them, loving one man out of habit and another out of lust, or maybe something deeper. Damon started asking questions I couldn't answer. Do you love him? Would you ever leave him? Is this just sex, or is this something real? I dodged, deflected, pretended I hadn't heard, because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. Mark was starting to notice things too, Little changes in my mood, how distant I'd become. The way I flinched when he touched me unexpectedly. One night, he looked at me across the dinner table, eye tired, voice soft, "You feel far away, are we okay?" And for a moment, I wanted to scream no, to confess everything, to fall into his arms and beg for forgiveness, even if I didn't deserve it. But instead, I smiled and said, "Just tired, babe." He believed me, or maybe he wanted to, but I could feel it, the cracks widening, the foundation of our life trembling beneath the weight of my silence. And Damon, he was starting to demand more than just moments. He wanted promises. He wanted a future. And I wasn't sure who I even was anymore. It ended not with a bang, but a silence I couldn't fill. Damon had been growing more impatient. By the day, he wanted me to choose. But how do you choose between the man you promised your life to and the man who made you feel alive again? The answer came for me one ordinary Sunday afternoon. Mark came home early. I had forgotten to lock the back door. Damon was still upstairs, his shirt tossed on my bedroom floor, the bed unmade in a way Mark would notice instantly. And just like that, the two worlds I'd worked so hard to keep apart came crashing into each other. Mark didn't yell, didn't scream. He just stood there still, eyes hollow, and said one word, "How long?" I opened my mouth to lie, but the weight of all the months, all the stolen touches, all the tangled sheets and whispered phone calls, it broke me. "Months," I whispered, "since before your birthday." He nodded once. Then he walked past me into the room, picked up Damon's shirt, held it for a second like he didn't know if it was real, and then dropped it like it burned. That night, he didn't sleep in our bed. He didn't sleep in the house, and Damon, he never came back either. He tried calling once or twice, but I didn't answer, because I knew this wasn't about choosing anymore. It was about losing a man who would have done anything for me, losing the self-respect I'd traded for passion, losing the version of me who once believed she could never be this person. I wish I could say I've forgiven myself, that I learned, that I grew, that I rebuilt from the ashes. But truth, some betrayals don't lead to healing. Some leave scars you can't see, but you feel every time you pass by your old wedding photo, or hear his favorite song, or lie in a bed that suddenly feels too big. I told this story not for sympathy, not for pity, but because secrets rot in silence. And if even one person hears this and steps back from the edge, if one person chooses honesty over the thrill, then maybe this pain was worth something. Maybe